Yay.
You get it right this way.
No, we got to kind of see the kids, but other than that,
No,
we got to teach them nothing.
no. You got to know what's in the bottom.
No.
No.
That's, talk about what we're going to talk about.
Yes.
So we have, so what's neat about container garden or raised beds is you create the soil you need for what you're growing. So one plant people like to grow are blueberries. And what's the issue with growing blueberries in Marshall County for the most part? Unless you just have the native ones growing, already growing on your property, because that's probably the right soil. It's the pH issue in our soil. So we had a meeting out at Indiana Berry with Sam Irwin, and he always is frustrated when people with mineral soils wants to plant blueberries here in the north, because as he puts it, our soils tend to be neutral, so you need to try to acidify them. Then we water them with high pH water, thinking we're going to maintain an acidic environment. So I get the questions that he gets to where the pH is wrong, then the plants aren't performing well. But if you container grow them like they're doing in Florida, you can create a soil that matches the needs of the plant. So you'd have to use amendments that would make the container in that, the soil in that container acidic. So we can do that. We can create our own soil when we're doing raised beds or container gardening. We can select what works best. And then the real advantage in some cases, we create good drainage just by the height, right? So we can, even if the soil isn't really that well drained, you can adjust the height of your container and so that it'll get a lot of good drainage out of that container. So the plants are growing in a good environment. Any thoughts? I just taught fifth graders that I made them interact with me yesterday when I was talking to them. Here's a quick question. Where did tomatoes come from in the world? Does anyone know? Tomatoes. I heard England. Italy? Actually, it was the Incas, or Native Americans, that from the Andes Mountains is where tomatoes came from, and potatoes as well. We can thank the Incas doing that. And we can thank for squashes, they were found in caves that people lived in Central America, so true Native American, over 7,000 years ago, close to 8,000 years ago. That's how long squash has been raised, or at least harvested by people. Did you know that? So you can thank your pumpkin that you use in the fall for two things, Native Americans and large mammals like mammoths, because they were bitter and a little bit toxic. So small animals couldn't have eaten them and lived to spread the seeds. So their theory is it was large mammals that ate them and spread the seeds. A little trivia, especially since we have a cucurbit right there in the front of this picture. It kind of fits that last comment. So our real benefit is, as we age, is by having a raised bed at the height where we don't have to bend over. That makes it easy too, because we can just reach and do our thing in that perfect soil. We want to make sure that we can reach it though. So if the container is up against the wall, you just want it 2 feet wide. Or if it's a separate bed, like in that picture, you want it to be like 4 feet so you can work from both sides and not have to walk in the raised bed and compact the soil. And, you know, so in this picture, it's kind of an idea garden because we have these raised beds with a lot of space in between with mulch in there. So it's easy to care and work that area. So we may not have that much space to do that, but that's kind of a neat scenario right there if you have that much space. So we can use many things for raised beds. I have half 55 gallon drums to do some container gardening at home. So then I can put in the soil that I want. And with these raised beds, we'll talk about what you put them in it. You want some real soil in there. They're that large. Yeah. You can use cinder blocks, and we did that out at Military. We just took a single layer of cinder blocks to have a mini raised bed. And then in the holes in the cinder blocks, you can plant individual plants in those holes as well. So you have like little mini gardens on the cinder blocks going around it, and then a raised bed in the center.
Are the plants smaller than?
Yeah, so like you can put herbs or flowers or different things like that in the center blocks, and then the larger vegetables actually in the veggie crate in between the blocks. But you would want to be careful not to stack them too high because they can fall over if they're not locked together. Or we can use, the good thing is we can use treated lumber now. We used to say not with the old method that we used to use to treat our lumber. With modern treated lumber, you can use it, not worry about it. Or wood that's naturally resistant to rot. You can buy kits to make raised beds that are made out of plastic that can snap together. We did that for the Catholic Church one year when we were teaching them about raising vegetables for their school. So we made a quick raised bed that we just snapped together. Could be something as simple as an old livestock water trough. There you go, Bree. You can, when they get a little hole in them, they can become a raised bed.
Reuse, reduce, recycle.
And there's nothing wrong, and I had this question once, you can use galvanized metal or sheets. That's not an issue. Someone was worried that components from that could get in the soil and uptake by the plants, and it really doesn't. So those are safe to use as well. So you can just make your own wooden raised bed and then use something like the galvanized metal sheets to create the sides to have a nice, attractive raised bed. Or anything creative using old pots and things like that. I have a master gardener that wanted to come to our master gardener meeting and talk about a system that he does. He takes a pot and put it within a larger pot. And then in this pot, he'll make a slit and he puts felt through it to this bottom pot where he creates a self-watering container for plants. You can buy containers that have a reserve so you don't have to water it as often. But he makes his own just using some felt wicks to put down into the bottom of the container. You just don't want to, whenever you don't have, we'll talk about this, holes on the bottom, you always want to be careful not to overwater, obviously. Because we can't get out of the container, you want to be careful not to overwater. But the idea is just to make sure that you get the container full of some liquid, and then the wick will take it up to the soil and the plants can get that way. So when you go on a vacation, you don't come home to dead plants. Actually, that's about watering. I happened to a lady in Washington, Indiana. She had this gardening thumb, but she was too busy watering all the time. So the roots, if you water too much, this is your soil, your roots will stay on the soil surface. Won't go down here. If they're getting everything they need right here, that's where roots will grow. So we always want to that's why we always say we want to make sure that after we water, we want the soil to dry out so the roots will go down for moisture deeper in the soil and nutrients. And what she did was she watered those plants and she took a vacation and she came home and it was a hot week and her plants, her decoration in front of her house on the main street in Washington, Indiana, all of them were dead. And she was known for a green thumb. So her green thumb wasn't so green that year because she overwatered too often.
Why didn't it perk back up?
Because once the plant's root systems dry out, the plant's dead. A dry root is a dead root. So if you have the plant where it wilts down and the roots are up there, it's a really hot week, and the soil dries out where the roots are, the roots could die. If someone's not there to supplemental water. Now she will just water once a week. And not at all in the weeks that it rained, her plants will have survived the week and of her vacation. So we can create our own poor rooting watering situations. So things that we can use as wood would be like cedar. We could use that treated lumber because it no longer has arsenic in it like the old treated lumber did. So you're worried about the old treated lumber that we used to have. It would tell you to line it with plastic. Now you don't need to worry about that. So that's good. So that's what that's noting is treated lumber has now been out of the consumer use for a long time. But if you get one of those old arsenic treated CCA lumbers, then you want to line it with plastic if you use it for a raised bed. For a newer one that we use, that's not an issue. Then what do we put in the raised bed? Someone give me some ideas. So we got a large raised bed. Do we just use potting mix, which is not soil at all? No, we want to include some loam soil, some organic matter being compost or well-rotted manure to add organic matter to that loam soil, helping to soften the loam soil because we're going to be watering, so it has a potential to compact. And then we want like a third of vermiculite or perlite to aerate it. So we're actually using more real soil than what we would do in a small container, which would just be potting mix. So, I put in my tradition, or did I? 1 part loam soil, 1 part organic soil, 1 part peat, and 1 part perlite. So that's what I used to do in high school. I would have these 3 piles. After I went to the work of sterilizing the loam soil and the muck soil, the organic soil, I used steam to do it. I did it all because I was a high school cheap labor. So I steamed those soils. After I dug the loam soil out of the back field, and then I would have this, grinding unit to throw it in so it wouldn't be any clods. So it'd be 1 scoop loam soil, 1 scoop peat, 1 scoop perlite, and 1 scoop organic soil. So I did many hours of doing that. Because back then, believe it or not, we created our own potting soil for the greenhouse. We didn't buy it. Now they buy it because it's more economic to do that versus trying to create your own. So back then, I actually created it.
What's in the loam soil?
That's just the soil that has the right mineral mixture, and loam soils usually have higher organic matter than other soils like sand or clay soil. So it's the texture of the soil. So if you fill soil and it feels gritty, that would have too much sand in it. So it wouldn't be the ideal soil to use. And then if you picked up soil and it really was sticky and you can make this is what soil scientists do. They take soil, put a little moisture to it, and they make a ball out of it. And it's actually as good as your, Harold, your good rimming thing. So if you're under stress, you want to do soil texturing because it's a calming thing. You just get this ball of soil and get the right moisture content. And then you squeeze it through your fingers, and based on how long of a ribbon it creates, we'll know if it has clay in it. So if it makes a decent size ribbon that sticks together as you're squeezing the soil between your fingers, you know it has a high clay content soil. So that wouldn't be the best one to use. So if it feels real gritty, or if it you can make a long ribbon out of it, or you go to that soil site I told you about, we can check the soils you have. But I lived in Napanee, and this greenhouse was in Napanee, and we have a Napanee soil that's a loam soil. So we have a lot of loam soil in the town of Napanee. So that's what I was using, probably a Napanee loam soil as that component after I sterilized it, so we could use it as a potting medium. And when if you're just doing a raised bed and transplanting plants into it, steaming it like I did won't be as important. Nor do you need to put in your oven to sterilize it at 150 degrees to make your house smell perfect. But if your spouse is causing you troubles, put some soil in the oven and turn it on and then you can defend why you're doing it. But then you can say, well, behave better.
Never would I heat my soil. That's too much work.
That's why we can buy potting mixes and just like I said, make sure your bag is not compromised by being, because you go to these box stores to buy it and a third of them have holes punched in them and stuff, so don't buy those. Someone else can get those if you're potting up young plants. So what we put in those raised bed structures is actually soil, just unmodified soil. And then when we do container gardening, this is a neat aspect of where your porch becomes your place for your herbs and other plants that you'd like to harvest. Christina has a structure that she puts over potted herbs on. So she has like a pyramid of them out her back door. So it's really a neat structure that she has.
Oh, I don't know if I have it on me, but I know I have stackables, I have pot hooks that you screw into your wall and the pot lid just tucks in and it holds by pressure. I have all sorts of fun pots. Come on.
It's very nice.
Yeah.
So you could just go in your back door and get the herbs you need, go back in and finish your.
I wouldn't know any better. But yeah, I have herbs growing and I put herbs also that are like bugs don't like. So I have like lemon balms and mints and all those things so that while I'm sitting back there, the herbs are double duty. I can take them in the house, use them inside, but I can also have them right where I'm sitting. And they're right up there. It's snow.
And the neat thing about having them in a pot, you may not have enough light to have them actively growing in the wintertime, but you can put them in an area and preserve them until the next spring. Like pine is a
Yes.
perennial, but it had like mine didn't overwinter this winter by staying outside. So you have some herbs that are perennials that you can protect so you can have them next year. And that actually will increase your herb options if you want to save them year to year, is if you have a protected area to put them in the winter time. Sage will make it through the winter. There's some that are pretty hardy. Mint will, of course. Mint is just trying to keep it in one spot so it doesn't spread everywhere.
Unless you have too many leaves on it.
But you know, you can just, I like that. This is kind of an odd thing about me. I like to grow mint and sage because I like to chew it like chewing gum when I'm outside working. So I'll just take some off and pop it in my mouth, and that gives me something to chew on that I enjoy. And I do that instead of other options because sage is good. I like the texture of sage as a mouth plant chewing item. So, so we can have multiple things that we're growing in smaller pots that we can harvest, and then the location is up to you. It could be part of your patio, balcony, deck, porch. You could grow them in your windowsill. So they're accessible. You don't have to walk far to get herbs and items like that out of containers. So it just increases your options of what you can grow and where. And who says, I did a class on edible landscape. There's nothing wrong with asparagus being part of your landscape because it will become ferns after you're done harvesting it. And you can incorporate some of these plants into your just landscape so it's close to the house and not in a garden where you have to walk a distance to get it. So there's many options that you can do on these various plants. And why not have strawberries, ever-bearing, day-neutral strawberries as a ground cover in an area that has full sun? Because then you can pick berries in the spring and the fall to use.
You can feed the animals to it.
There you go. Yeah. Like my rabbits eating my brassicas. Rabbits like those, by the way. So if you have cabbage or something now, they'll nip it off. And then you can include it as part of your landscape. So it can be anything that you want to use. Preferably if it has drainage, it's better. But you can use they have bags. They even sell containers that you can grow tomatoes in. That's not Long-term, it's just for one season. So wood, clay, plastic, cement, metal. You can modify your household items such as tubs, crates, buckets, bushel baskets, whiskey barrels. I don't think anyone has whiskey barrels in their yard. They're kind of expensive to buy these days, but they're traditionally an option. And tires. So I don't think that fits well in the landscape. Tires.
I have tires. I use them for my sedum so that it stays in one spot. And then it covers the tire so you don't even see the tire. So I have like a sedum that grows over and then you can't even tell it's a tire.
I can give you a tire or two if you need more.
I have two. They were in my landscape when I bought the house. I'm like, yeah, it's all right. So I just left it and put my sedum in there and now I don't even see it. Just covered up.
And then they do work if they're full, so they don't become a mosquito problem.
Right.
So yeah, they would work. If you're creative, a wheelbarrow, cedar blocks, we already talked about those. So there's many things you can do. It's up to your imagination and creativity and how they fit into your landscape. You can just see here, you can just slice open a bag of a growing medium and plant right in there and good to go. And there's another way that you can create a gardening bed if you have medium, kind of like what I said you would use to fill in a raised bed. You can take cardboard and just put it down in an area and use that same soil mix that I said you put into those raised beds. You can just put that on top of that cardboard and now you have a gardening bed without having to till the soil and kill the grass because it will do it for you. So if you want a small garden area and you don't want to do a lot of tillage, it's as quick as that. And how many of you have more cardboard than you know what to do? I am so tired of shipping containers. You know, it's like that's all I get is cardboard. So yeah, you'd want to use the cardboard that will break down rapidly. So you wouldn't want it to have like a film over it that prevents water movement and stuff. So you want to use the cardboard that in a year from now, the roots will grow right through it. So in the future, that bed is a fully functioning bed with the roots growing down into the soil. So it can be as quick as that. I don't suggest a toilet. I've seen people use toilets as their containers. It's a different item to have in your landscape. I really wasn't impressed, but that's up to you. We once had a master gardening class where people actually took pictures of odd things to put in their yard as a container. And sharing what people selected. It's kind of fun. A boat, I've driven by a yard where they have an old boat out in their yard and trust me, you can get those pretty cheap these days. If it's a really old boat that needs repair, I say free on Craigslist occasionally. Free boat, well, it's totally junk, but it would work as a deck, a raised bed. Drainage is here, it's as a must, and I agree with you're going to have issues if you don't. And you want adequate drainage so that if you have your container outside, you may get a 3-inch rain one day. So you want to be able to handle moisture and rain out of that. So your roots are always in a moist soil in your container. But you can, again, have a double container if you have an attractive pot that you want to use as your container because of decoration. You can put another pot inside of it and let it drain into the bottom of your decorative pot so that you do get water out of that pot. And you just got to be careful not to overwater it. And don't place it under eaves. I went into Applebee's once, and I won't say which Applebee's, but they had a boxwood that's very sensitive to moist soil. And it was where the water was running up the roof right into that container. So that was a negative for that plant. It didn't make it, by the way. I mean, it's too loud. I often think, should I just knock on people's doors or interrupt someone? Because I want to talk to that manager. I'll be talking to an employee who really doesn't care. Or like in southern Indiana, we have these bagworms that live on trees. And I drive by houses and the tree was 3/4 eaten. And I know they think that's just part of the tree. I thought, should I knock on the door and tell them the tree's gonna be dead in a couple of weeks if they don't do something about it? And I thought, they'll just get mad at me and not understand what I'm saying, so I don't intrude upon
You
people.
can knock on my door.
I can knock on
If I
your door.
need, if I need to know, you
If
know.
I see something. I always feel bad, because on evergreen, once they eat the buds on the end of the branch, it's dead, you know, so. We get them up here now too with our more mild winters, but historically, we used to have cold enough winters up here that we did have the bagworm. That's the one that lives inside of an individual bag.
Is that the thing they call tent worms too? It's got that like a net.
No, that's a different,
That's a different worm.
Harold is showing pictures he took of a eastern tent caterpillar that, you know, when you have those, because they make a webbing on the trunk of the tree and they feed out. And then if you go up and down the roads in Marshall County, you see a lot of webbing on the branches of the tree. That's the fall webworm that's doing that. So we have three different, two of them make webbings, and you say bagworms, everyone tends to think of the.
And they're underground, crawl up in the tree.
Yeah.
I found them the first day, so I broke the nest open and put them all on the ground. Went home the next day, I went back, I was talking about, and they crawled up like the 6 adjoining trees. And I eat fruit tree store has cat cannon all the time, and that took it right out. So I just applied the spray from the dog. You have to break the web.
And you shouldn't use a torch. When I was in high school, I had a friend whose job that day was to torch the tent caterpillar webbing.
It's like a little tree on fire, huh?
No, but there was a potential for doing something that was not safe when you're taking literally a propane torch outside and lighting it to burn the tent, eastern tent caterpillars.
And the one you were talking about was what?
There's one that we call a bagworm, and it makes an individual bag, and in that bag is the leaves off of the tree itself that they work in there. And on evergreens, it almost kind of looks like a pine cone. So on evergreens, people actually think it's part of the tree. So they never, if they don't have time to process it, think it's what's doing the damage to the tree. And then what happens is they hatch out in the spring of the year. They're a little tiny and cute, and they start making their bag. And then the females never leave their bag. They can make a spin a web to float from tree to tree, but they tend to live in that bag or they crawl to a tree. The male is going to fly around and mate. But I'm assuming they don't have a long life. It's usually better to be a female in the insect world than a male. I mean, praying mantises, they eat the males after they mate. But so then they lay their eggs inside of the bag, and that's how they overwinter as eggs. So up north, when we have a really tough winter, those eggs will die from the coldness. You know, so when we had real winters, like when I was younger in the 70s and 80s, they didn't survive our winters, and they didn't survive a winter when it got down to 27 degrees a few years back. And when we had mild winters, those eggs overwinter. So what I say, if you have bagworms, what you do is you want to cut them up in the spring to see if there's viable eggs in there. Then if there is, then you want to spray an insecticide as soon as they hatch out. Because in that bag could be 300 babies. So if you have do the math, 13 blue will work.
Yeah.
So if I have 13 bagworms this year, 13 females, times, let's just be a little bit pessimistic, and it's only 200 live. So that's, that fast, you have 260 bagworms the next year. And then if you don't do anything about them, then it just really explodes. And with taller evergreen trees, they can get up high. They do get on deciduous plants, but they're not the issue for deciduous plants because they can relieve and bud out again. With evergreens, they'll actually kill branches. They'll just be dead.
But you need another 0.
Okay, no, that's too many, 2,600.
No, we're all happy with that.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah, so that's how we get in trouble. We don't notice that 13 And as a really mild winter, you jump from that to that number of female larvae feeding on your tree. And then they pupate, become a female, lay the eggs in all the winter. So you want to catch them when they're young, and then they're easy to control. You don't even have to use a strong insecticide. You can actually, the first instar, use VT, Vexillus thuringiensis, to kill that first instar, which is an organism that won't hurt us at all. So I always worry about people spraying trees, because I picture them spraying the tree and the mist coming back in their face and they're breathing in what they're spraying. That's my picture.
So you can't just, if you've got the back one, and just cut it open, why don't you just throw it in the trash?
Well, that's one. Yeah, you don't put it back on the tree, but
For sure,
But if you have a lot of them, if you have 200, yeah, if you only have 13, you pick them up.
Okay.
I used to tell Amish in southern Indiana that every time your children need to be punished, tell them to go pick bagworms. You know, so for that offense, it's 50 bagworms. Because you have to take them off, and you can't just throw them on the ground like
Yeah.
Harold said about Eastern caterpillar. You actually have to throw them in something so they die. You know, so they have to go around and collect 50. They could be that too once they're in that larva stage. When they're a larva growing, they can be used as fish bait, sure. Or if you have chickens, you probably could feed them to chickens, but make sure they eat them. So then we just have to think about in containers too. If that's one way we can actually get more production out of containers, having them having support, or even like a cage system where they can grow on that. So they can vine up. So you can get vining plants to grow up instead of out. That's what we do with container plants. And we already covered this in a previous class, but you want to just remember that if you want to take advantage, if you're going to have raised beds and put that effort into it, you want to use them throughout the growing season to get more than one harvest out of them. And take advantage of limiting space for plants, or you're not wasting your container. So that's where those publications I gave you that tell you how much space one plant needs will tell you how many plants you can plant in that container. So that's a good guide to follow. So we can interplant fast and grow, just like we talked about earlier in a garden space. So you can put like radishes out, you know, and also be planting a longer term vegetable side by side, because you're harvesting the radishes before the other vegetable is shading and competing with them too much. But we can do things like that in our container gardening too. And then we can plan on planting one crop early, then replacing it with another crop later. So we can go to spring and midsummer crop, or a spring and a fall crop in the same container in that growing season to get more production. So if you're going to do container gardening, you want to try and get plants that are going to be not as large. So you want ones that are described as being more compact or bush in production, or dwarf, so that it'll fit the space that you're trying to grow it in. Because a good one would be cucumbers. There's different cultivars of cucumbers. Some will be more vining and take up more space, and some will be more compact. So you want to try and select one that will fit in the container and just use the space that you want to allow for it.
If the flowers fall off, squash, is that because it needs more nutrients?
Or poor pollination. So, squash is one plant that needs pollinated, because you need to get the pollen from the male to the female flower. So then you have not a lot of activity. The squash will either be deformed if it's not properly pollinated, or so on. So it can be a pollination issue. So having bees around is a good thing. There are a lot of the vegetables that we grow to do pollination. So yeah, that could be a pollination issue. Anyone has experience growing cultivars that are more compact? Any thoughts? Of course, Christina. You know, she should be teaching this class because she got a degree in horticulture. I got my
You should
degree in
go over to my house.
ruminant nutrition. Go ahead, share your thoughts.
Well, this year, and I just saw it, but I did, peas. I didn't realize that there was a door variety of peas. So I did that for the first time this year, and I have it in a container. I put like 5 seeds, and it's doing so well. I have a little cage around it, so I have something to grab onto. But yeah, it's staying super small, and I'm hopefully gonna be able to get some flowers here soon. I thought with all the heat, but it might have been put, but it shook out of it, and we've had some really nice weather, but I didn't even think about peas having an option in my house. So, that was completely out of the blue, and now I'm like, so then cucumbers are the next thing. I'm like, I didn't even realize cucumbers grew in a bush, and I've been growing cucumbers forever. I just never thought that that was an option. So really, I mean, take time to look something up if you really feel like you want to grow something in a container and you don't have a lot of space. I never would have even thought about it.
And this could be on your patio, so as you're sipping your favorite brew in the morning, you can be inspecting if you got stuff to harvest. You know, so it's just right there. You don't have to like make an extra trip to the gardener.
My son was eating the little lettuce bowl that I brought like a horse. And he doesn't eat vegetables, but he decided he was gonna eat that lettuce, so I let him eat it like a horse. And now it's already regrown and it looks just like back to being time to harvest, they said. So.
In this day and age, there's so many cultivars of anything you want to grow that it's worth doing the research to find a cultivar that fits your use that you want, how you want to grow it, you know, and make sure it has some resistance if you want to grow it without using a lot of, you know, pesticides or stuff, and we don't want to do. I mean, the last thing I want in my ornamental landscape is something I have to spray. So a crabapple tree, once it gets to the point where it's always losing its leaves by July, it's gone. So I'm not going to spray an ornamental tree. I'm going to select a cultivar that has resistance that prevents that from happening. Because time is money. Time is actually, where's that item there? We need time just to be able to relax and move this device, you know, so we don't.
I didn't want to take away from class, so I put them away. It's your class.
So 2 things are happening. If you have plants that take a lot of protective chemicals to keep them healthy, you're going to be and not have time to relax. Or you're going to have to do this a lot to relax. What are we doing? This is supposed to be a common.
Top tier plants. Start button that.
Then you take your medicine and you carry on the rest of your day.
Chop back, no plan anymore.
Video it, prove it.
Yeah, sell it, make millions, there you go.
And so then you can be creative. I mean, you can do true vertical gardening if you have a wall, and you can make the size fit the space you want to grow. So your strawberries can literally be on a wall close to your back door that you can go harvest as you want in the spring, or have big neutrals in the spring and fall. Or that could be your herb garden that's vertical, and it's real simple to do. You just make a container that can hold a plastic liner, and then you put the mix into the liner, and you punch holes where you want to grow plants. So it's not complicated.
So it doesn't fall out because you've got all of it covered like with giant saran wrap, basically.
Yeah, or you know, if it's a smaller one, it could just be a trash bag that you poke holes in, and it's got to have drainage, and you just poke holes where you want the plants to grow. And we do this with container gardening too for strawberries, where we have containers where we punch holes at different spots and have them growing vertically too. And a new way of growing strawberries is they just have them in pots and make like a pyramid with it, like Christina does with herbs, to where you have a smaller area that's vertical, that's getting the light, so you're not spreading it out. And that's great with like day neutrals that you may not want to overwinter, or you could overwinter them, because anything in a pot can go into a better climate for the winter to overwinter. So you have options if they're a container grown plant, if you want to save them the next year if it's a perennial plant. And with those strawberries, you can start new strawberries in those pots as they vine, so you can keep it going for a few seasons with the plants that are being produced. Or you can have like a raised bed garden. Doesn't that look calming? That is not, I don't picture that as my gardens I've had in the flat past.
There's no way.
I know
Strawberries
we,
in it this year, but. Just wax them all down.
exactly.
They're getting into the. And those are at the Dollar Tree, like they have them for a buck. They're usually like $10 if you get them in like 50 grams. So that was really.
So that's all cool.
Yeah.
So you bought a few of them and then you staggered how you.
You can get them pretty tall, but you know, be careful, they will topple over. It's fine, but like, I put, in that one, since I don't have very much stuff in there, I put like some of my broken terracotta pots in the bottom to weigh it down. But I know people have put poles through the middle of it, if they have it in the garden, then you can stack it up real high. So, you just
This is Dollar Tree or General Dollar?
Dollar Tree, like in the springtime or late winter, is usually when they pull them out and people scoop them up, so you gotta be on the lookout. But yeah, those are great. Herbs work fantastic in them and everything.
So then we'll post that on our webpage next year when they're out, so you can just check it. Go get the stackables.
You can get the stackables for a buck a piece, and you can't beat that.
So
Well,
my-
I guess
my-
$1.25 now, my bad. Sorry, $1.25.
So raised beds in my career would work better for me because I would do this larger garden and it looked good in the spring of the year. And I'd get busy with my job during the summer months. I became the weed garden. So I could use my garden to identify weeds that people had to fight in the weed in their gardens because I just didn't have the time to time one. Then you start pulling the weeds and that's working out plants and roots that you want if you don't do it timely. But in a raised bed situation with square foot gardening, you're not going to have a weed issue, and so the plants themselves are going to be helping you to shade the garden space, and you can keep the weed seed low. Because just remember, the first year that you let weeds go to seed in your garden, you got that weed for years in advance. You went to an annual because that seed's going to stay in that soil, and some of it's going to germinate next year. So. One of our favorite plants in agriculture is called Palmer Amaranth, and it produces 500,000 seeds per plant, and the seeds will last up to 10 years. Now, a high percent of them die every year, but after 10 years, 10% of 500,000 is how many seeds that could be germinated.
So what are you gonna do with your raised bed or fix that?
With a raised bed, I'm going to create my own soil. That's not going to start off with a weed load. I'm going to use square foot gardening so I don't have as many weed issues. And since it's a raised bed and I'm not breaking my back bending over, I'm going to pull those weeds that do get started, because some will in a timely fashion, so they don't go. And you can see that's not that big of an area to manage. So you've got a more productive area that's smaller to produce the vegetables you want. So you're not doing as massive of a garden area to get produce for your household. So it's less time. And then what's really cool is this is a compost bin back here. So as I get things that need to be composted, I put it back there. And then I'm creating my compost for the next growing season. So that one's a very attractive garden scenario. So that could be in your side yard where your neighbor sees it, and it's no issue because it's an attractive garden. We did last year a program in Plymouth about gardening in your front yard. So a nice, attractive raised bed could even find its place out there if no one's going to complain. My garden that I had in southern Indiana was my front yard. I'd have a lot of complaints sometimes. But that's part of my job. And I guess what discouraged me is my wife. Not really doesn't like fresh vegetables, but she doesn't like to process them. So my joke was I took my green beans, stick them into the house, and she would just toss them. Because I didn't have time to process them. In my retirement years, I will grow my vegetables and process them myself and enjoy it more. Nothing bad about her. She had 4 children she was raising, so I understand her time limit, so I'm not being negative on my wife. Actually, I'm one of those weird people. My wife is my hero. I mean, she did amazing things with my handicapped children, and when she was healthy, when she was younger, she was like a lioness when it came to the children. So when a school told her there was no room for handicapped children in their school, she didn't agree with them. And luckily, the new laws for handicapped people were just recently passed, and guess what? My kids were in their classrooms because of my wife. So that was kind of, and there's more to talk about container gardening. You just want to find devices, because my dad always had this container, you can buy them, that has that reserve down there that can have water and fertilizer in it. So you don't have to, in that one, he had more potting mix because it wasn't a large container, so compaction was more of an issue. But because of that reserve, it took care of itself for the most part. And he grew his tomato plants in that. Then he provides staking in that to harvest his tomatoes. So you can buy containers that do a lot of work for you when you're doing container gardening, or it can be like herb shower and create your own container like that, using felt as your wicking agent to get it up to the soil. So you can be as creative as you want. And you can use toilets if you want. That's your option. It's America. We have freedom. We can do whatever we want. So the other part of the talk tonight is extending the growing season. So you tell me, what do you do? What do you think are options to extend the growing season? Well, yeah. When I lived in southern Indiana, instead of, May 7th being the first frost, it was early April. So they planted their corn in late March in southern Indiana a lot of times if the weather conditions were right, without worry about frost issues with a young seedling crop. So moving would be a great way to extend that. Using cold hardy vegetables is another way, because we can plant those earlier and harvest those and come back and plant very tender vegetables after some of those. So we can use that space twice. And then this is covering up, but fall gardening depends on each vegetable has different days, and you have that handout with some of those days when it's ideal time to plant them. But you want to plant them early enough so you get production out of them before frost comes. So like tomato plants, I think it's just repeating the planting date a couple of times. So you have tomato plants at different spots going. So when the early ones get diseased, you can just rely on the second crop. Because some plants have disease issues. I already talked about that, where, doing multiple days of planting may be the best option to extend this growing season on those. So, so we can start early. This is clearly in March, when we can be planting some of our very hardy vegetables. And we can be extending the growing season through these very tenders. Then we can come back and it's really late July and August is when we plant the fall crops. So we can do planting then. So by the time it gets to fair time in Marshall County, it's time to start thinking about planting your fall crop. You should be pretty much done planting your cool season and your tender vegetables by then, so you get a long enough growing season. So we have about 120 days, and some vegetables take that are in these categories to produce, like gourds. How many of you like to grow gourds? Have you done that? So how do you grow gourds?
Ignore
Ignore them?
Plant them, don't cut the grass too close. But they have to be planted early as a plant, not a seed.
Yeah.
And then, or you can wait to see inside, but basically, they'll go plenty of spoiled by on top, so they're ready to go. And so, but they need a long growing season, and like pumpkins, you don't want to plant too early, because they're too soft and rot by the time Halloween comes around. So you have to the way planting goes, because they grow quicker than that season, but you adjust for it.
Yeah. But one way, you just said it, how you extend the growing season and you plant transplant and not seeds. So that's one way that we can extend the growing season. That's one way you can have the early season sweet corn to be the envy of your neighbors, is instead of planting it as seed, you plant some as transplants. And like sweet corn Charlie, he does that just to have that early season sweet corn to sell, because if you're selling the crop, it's the early season that'll garner the better price. When you can buy sweet corn everywhere, guess what? People aren't willing to pay as much, you know? But so sweet corn Charlie gets ahead of the game by doing that, and also using plastic to get it to grow faster. So that's another way we can extend the growing season. So one is use transplants. One is to use a plastic mulch. Why would that help?
Keeps the weeds out.
Keeps the weed seed down, but it helps heat the soil, so your soil will warm up quicker. We had a grower in southern Indiana that planted sweet corn into clear plastic mulch, which is the best way to heat up the soil is clear plastic. But then the bad side of using clear plastic is then the weed seedlings germinate and grow too. So you have to have a herbicide down, pre-emergent herbicide to control those. But the clear plastic was kind of like planting transplants for him, because it germinated and grew faster, so he had the early season sweet corn to sell. So plastic mulch can warm our soils quicker and extend the growing season where we get back to growth. Is there anything else we can do to extend the growing season?
Look at the growing, everybody names to your cold spot. Some cold spots, I'm sure.
Yeah,
Days
so
of maturity.
adjust, based upon the days to harvest on what you're planting. So if you want 2 crops on one area, you make sure that you can work it in based upon the time those plants need to grow. So we can adjust that knowing the days to harvest. That's how we can take full advantage of our growing season. So if we have a system in place to protect against frost, we can plant earlier than maybe these time frames, a little bit cheating if the calendar tells us we can. But you need to have a system in place to protect the plants if you do that. So what can we do to protect our plants that we planted and we've got a frost coming in one night? Cover it. Yeah. Can be covered with plastic. I'll show you some different options here in a second. Transplant, protect plants from the first cold weather event, and move plants indoors. So container gardening, the advantage is if it's in a container, I can set it in the garage if I'm going to have a frost early, and then put it back out. Another advantage of having them in containers, you can move them. Once they're planted in soil, you can't move them, or those raised beds, you can't be moving them. But so you can move them to a protected environment. So you can just use a blanket to put them over to get through a one cold event, to hold in the soil moisture. Of course, you put it on before it cools off so that it's trapping in the warmth that's already there to get it through the night. You can use tarps or plastic. You can use walls of water on tender plants like tomatoes, where it actually has water in there that has to be cooled before it loses the heat. So the plant has that warmth of that warmer water than the air temperature protecting it. How many of you buy milk? You got a protective device right there. You just have to cut off the bottom and put it over the plant, and it will help protect the plant if it's a cold event happening. You put it on early in the day before the temperature drops and to hold in that warmth around the plant. And we're talking about getting through a minor frost here. We're not talking about 24 degrees. We're talking about 30 degrees. So things like this will work on minor frost. So we can use small or large hoop structures. This is how you extend the fall growing season on the cold hardy plants we grow, like kale, spinach, So we give them that small or large hoop plastic covering over it. They'll get it through cold events and keep it going. When we talk about fall gardening, we're not planning once that we get into October much growth in these. We're just trying to protect what has already grown. That's why we have to plant them in August and late July so that they get good growth, and they will grow on some warmer days, particularly if they're under something like that. And you'll be harvesting spinach in November if you want.
Have you seen those in Marshall County?
Yeah, I just overhauled seed that grows for the farmer's market here. He has what the vegetables he grows for farmer's market. He starts a lot of them in medium hoop structures, more like the ones on the right. And then he pulls it off as it warms up and gets us head start that way. So he has early tomatoes for the market.
Drip irrigation, or you would take those off? Okay.
Well, you could have deep tape underneath, I mean, that plastic tape that runs beside that's what they would use. So that irrigation can be happening while they're underneath that.
Yeah, then you wouldn't have to remove them.
Right. And then you'd remove it to get air movement when it warms up, because you don't want the seeds happening and get too hot. You know, I had someone using a high tunnel once that was, he's Amish, so they had an old day church, so he manually adjusted the plastic up to allow airflow in, but he got some damage because he didn't adjust it up enough for what happened that day. So you get so ventilation is important when you're using any plastic structure. But one reason why we want to think about the fall date, which they say our average first date of frost in the fall would be October the 4th. How many years is that not until like November? Can you remember some falls where it's just stayed warm all the way through October? How many of you can remember falls where you have a short cool period where you get a minor frost, but then 2 to 3 weeks after that we have Indian summer? So we just protect the plants, the gardens outside, raised beds for a whole period. Even tender plants can be producing well into the fall. We get them through that first mild cold event. So you want to be thinking about how I can do that. What we talked about, those row covers, mini tunnels, or if you got enough ground, you can get the federal government to pay 3/4 of the cost of one of those high tunnels. You know that? They have a cost share program, so they'll basically give you one. The only condition is for 4 years you can't use any heat in it. So our farm service director now has 2 that he got through the federal government. He's smart. He knows the system. Indian Mountain. But you can get one of those too if you have the land space, and they'll cost share on you because they want locally grown vegetables. Is the reason why they're willing to do it. But if you have a raised bed, why not create your own mini high tunnel? You can take hoops and attach them to the bed and have them in the soil, or just attach them to the bed, and then you cover these with plastic. And then if you have like a mini a greenhouse outside that you don't heat, you can actually make an area that has like a mini hoop structure inside of that greenhouse and have a double layer of protection, and even extend your growing season further into the fall. So I'm not talking about one of those big high tunnels that I showed you before, but you can buy, a smaller greenhouse that you used to start the plants in the spring of the year, but you could use that same greenhouse if you remove the beds out of it to be a place to extend fall vegetables into the fall and have that layer of protection. So that is my presentation. So if you have anything you want to discuss tonight, or have any questions about spending the growing season?